Well, hello everyone, Dr. Matthews here. I want to take a few moments and kind of update you and brief you up on the IRB process for CJ430, 450. I don't want to get into too many details about what we're going to be doing moving forward with the development of the course. I'll get to that a little bit later. But what I really want to do right now is kind of head off some things that are showing up, and we could probably fix them, whether you're teaching CJ430 or you're teaching CJ440, 450. So first off, I want to review or update you on this process. Although the IRB may be well known to you all because you're instructors, many of your students have no clue as to what IRB is or what it does, and they see us as an encumbrance or a hindrance or something to prevent them from doing their work. Not quite the case. What it is an opportunity for us to prevent Park University from being exposed to unnecessary litigation and for students to be more cognizant and diligent and ethical in their investigations. All right. So these are the three levels of IRB review. What we are doing in our CJ430, 450 course is limited review. The IRB chair has given me permission or designated me permission, and the board has given us permission to do limited reviews of IRB applications. The requirements are that these limited reviews that get approved, the IRBs that are approved, are in the expedited review process. That means that there are no protected subjects. There is a very limited, very constrained population for which is going to be reviewed, and that the subjects or participants are going to be anonymous. Let me pull up the IRB application. So I'm going to be attaching this into an email and sending this out to everybody as well. This is the IRB application that we will be using and that our students will be using for our IRB application process for CJ430, 450. In this process, you'll note it's very clear that if you're not going to, or if they're not going to be following the procedure, the process that we've got established here, then they must submit their review through the IRB process, the full board review. If I pull this back away, you can see here that the full board review requires that the student go through the process that's online. There's a link here for them to connect to, and it'll take them through the full board review. We don't want that. We want them to do an expedited review, which will allow us to do exempt or limited review of their IRB or their IRB application. All right. Those are all highlighted. The students don't need to do anything here. Put in their name, their park student ID, fill out the information. This is important. This isn't, and also run. This NIH training authorizes them to actually do the surveys, actually talk to our students. The date that they did the survey needs to be within 2 years. All of these should be yes. They're a student, yes, they're doing the research. If they're a student, what's the email of the faculty? That's where your information is going to go, as well as your email. If you're a student, what's the course? And that's going to be the course itself. Typically, this will show up in 430, and then it'll probably change later for 450 when it's actually submitted. Finally, this is really not a class project, but for our purposes, they can check any of these will be sufficient. The date that it starts has to be after or can't be before the date of the application. This is why in CJ430, they will be drafting this up and they will submit it to you for their final approval or for their review, your review, their approval, so it can get all corrected, any problems that might be issued or might arise. So I'm not too worried about the date, except that, you know, it's a date they're going to be using. In CJ450, when they actually submit this date's going to be correspond with the week they submit their IRB. So 430, they're going to have all this information. They're going to submit it to you. You're going to review it. 450, there is when you're going to actually have this compiled and you'll submit it to me. This is the biggies here. If any of the answers here is yes, then this is not an expedited review. This is not a limited IRB review. This is not an exempt review. This review has to go through the IRB itself. If they're going to fund their research, if it's international, if they're going to collect or review protected health information, if they're going to pay or compensate their participants in any way, if you have and you're targeting non-English speaking individuals, if you're going to record or take photographs, if you're going to request a waiver, alteration of the informed consent form or the process, if your subjects are minors, anybody under the age of 18, and if your subjects are going to be deceived or not completely informed. If yes is in any of these blocks, it is automatically a requirement for them to go through the full IRB process. They do not get the option of doing expedited or limited review. What's the title of the research project? I'm actually going to get into this a little bit more when I do a webinar for you all with regard to how you can quickly get information, get your students get this information in CJ430 and then unpack it a little bit later. Summarize your research in plain English. It should be very easy for them to say what their research is about, the research project is about, what they're planning or intending to do, what's the goal or the purpose of the research, how they're going to collect or get their data, which is going to be through surveys. Now, whether they do those face-to-face surveys or they do a combination of face-to-face and online surveys to Park students, they can explain that here. Ultimately, they should consider using the snowball method so that the surveys that they pass out to their Park students can be passed on to other students so they can get a bigger pool of responses back. The site which you're going to gather your data primarily is going to be Park University students, perhaps a campus center. Who's your participants? Again, Park University students, and the age range is 18 plus. If you want to do 21 plus or 21 and up, that's fine, but then that has to correspond with the survey data that's going to be requested in the surveys themselves. Finally, another spot, if any of these blocks are checked yes, any of these blocks are checked yes, then it has to go for the full IRB. Prisoners, legally incompetent people, students of the investigator. This is for a specific area. This is actually reserved for students in the education program who are doing some other things. Illiterate persons, and this is really saying, are you targeting these individuals? And the other protected populations would be targeting victims of crime. The reason why we want to stay away from those things is because the level of risk is exponentially raised by adding in any of these populations. So we don't want to do that. If we do that, then it's no longer expedited, exempt, or limited review. How are your participants going to be recruited? And you can get into that, how they go about recruiting participants. In your class, in the classroom, they should be talking to their other classmates, whether that's in the face-to-face classroom or it's online. They should be communicating with their own classmates so that they can also recruit their survey participants from their own classmates. How you're going to keep their identities confidential. A quick line about that will actually come out of the informed consent, and I'll show you that in just a second. What's the benefits? And this information also comes from the informed consent as well as the bulk of this data. So I'll show you that in just a second. You're going to be using, there's really not much of a difference between a questionnaire and a survey in my mind. So they can check either one or both. And then if there's an interview guide, that's fine. But they do need to attach the questionnaire or the survey in its totality. And then finally, this is just a reminder for them to read through so that you and they know that they got through all this information. They've already said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to adhere to and abide by the policies that are put in place with regard to this research project. And then they sign it, electronic signature is fine, and then they date it and they send it to you. That's part one. Let me bring up the informed consent. So this is the informed consent. I've highlighted in yellow the places that the student needs to adjust, modify, fill in the blanks, etc. You'll note we've got the little park logo here, which makes it much easier for me to recognize which informed consent is has been modified or which one hasn't been modified, if they're using old stuff. This is the new, the latest, the greatest, the best. It's highlighted and it's italicized. So they're being explained to, they're in here, they're going to ask their research participants to participate in the research study or their project of, and whatever the title of their project is. They were selected because they were Park University students or whatever the other selection criteria might have been. The purpose of the study, and this is where they're going to explain why, what the research question is, what the purpose of the study is in plain English. Ultimately, the research is going to be used for what purpose? So in many cases, the research may be used to inform decision makers in the field of law enforcement or decision makers in at police agencies, leaders, recruiters, trainers, something along those lines, and educate them on some fact or policy or procedure or perception, public perception of either police or law enforcement or criminal justice activity relevant to their research. But it just needs to be put in plain English. The fact that you're doing the research isn't so that you can get a grade. It isn't so that you can complete the task. It isn't so that you can finish the course. And it isn't just to make people aware. That's too general, too broad. There should be a specific purpose for the research study that you're doing, for the research project that the student is pursuing, and they can articulate that here. Description of the research. That's pretty much already filled out. If they want to add more information, they can. There are no known risks, reasonable or foreseeable, that are expected. If there are known risks, then they need to identify that, and also bear in mind, if there's risks associated with research, it goes back to the fact that there may be this research project may be subject to full IRB approval or full IRB approval. There will always, or there will never be any benefits to the research. No benefits associated with participating in this research. They're not getting extra credit. They're not getting extra points. They're not getting any kind of benefit, notoriety, nothing. No benefits. Confidentiality. They can usually use this as it is. You want to add in more stuff, that's fine, but take away nothing. All the records of the study are going to be kept confidential. You will not be retaining any identifiable information, and the study is anonymous. If we've got those things covered, then usually the confidentiality is pretty self-explanatory. The benefits and the payment go hand in hand. The persons participating in the research are not going to be paid, compensated, or somehow rewarded for doing the research, regardless of what they may think. They may think that by doing the research they'll get extra credit or whatnot. That is not coming from the researcher or the student. You have, or they have, at all times the right to refuse or withdraw, or in many cases to start the research and then fall out without any kind of undue pressure or any perceived negative results for not participating in the research, either from the researcher or from Park University. And they always have the right to ask more questions. Here, the researcher's name and his or her email needs to go in here. You as the faculty advisor or the faculty supervisor name will go in here. My name is already there. And the IRB chair. And we use this IRB chair at park.edu so that the chair of the IRB can better identify who's going to respond to this information. If the individual is doing electronic consent, then this is a perfectly acceptable method for electronic consent. They may even attach this blurb to the top of their survey or the front of their survey. Regardless, this entire informed consent must be attached to each or provided to each participant prior to them doing or conducting or completing the survey information that the researcher is going to provide for them. If they're doing a face-to-face, then you would simply have them change this electronic consent to lines. And the lines would have the researcher's a signature for the researcher, a signature for the individual, the participant, the date of the signature, and the fact that they agree. It's very simple. This is just, I just left this one here because Many of the participants are going to come from either online park emails that will be provided later or through their own email actions from the researcher. Finally, the supervisor's piece. You as a supervisor, the researcher has to fill this out. Again, the purpose of the study, the summary in plain English of what their study is, and then their name and then your name. Electronic signatures are fine. I don't expect folks to go through the machinations of getting it printed, getting it sent out, getting it, signing it, and then sending it back to the individual. It's not necessary for the expedited, for the exempt, for the limited review research. We're trying to make this more streamlined, more user-friendly, and easier for both you as the supervisor faculty, the participant as the person who's going to consent to participating in the research, the student as she or he completes her limited review or their park application, and keeping all this in mind with the fact that the approval process this is the most strenuous, this is a bit less strenuous, and I can do expedited reviews when the department chair of the IRB designates that to me. But limited reviews are where I will be focusing and where we should all be focusing our research, or our students' research, to be coming to us through a limited review. This gives me the authority or the jurisdiction, justification, permission to do and approve research, but only at this level. If for some reason you have some really good researchers who want to do some really interesting research and they need an expedited review, they can put it through the IRB process, and at which case it'll be sent out to one of the, I think there's 9 IRB members who will review it and then correspond directly with that individual. What else? Something else about the research that I wanted to make you aware of. Okay, it's kind of escaping me now. But also, let me just give you the flow. So the flow is, in CJ430, you will be teaching the students how to do all of these things. In CJ430, they will be creating these documents, preparing them, and in CJ430, they will be sharing them with you for your approval. Ideally, in CJ450, they would then submit you these documents with the updated dates very early on in the semester. You would then reapprove them, make sure that they're good to go, send them to me. I would get them the final approval, send it back to you, and then you would send it back to the student along with those emails for the students to complete. 2 things I want to share with you. One, the reason why this is a process that I want you to continue to go through is because you may not get that same student back. You might have started with them in CJ430, but then for whatever reason, they do not come to you in CJ450. They instead either had to sit out a semester or they do something else and may not come back to you at all. This way, no matter where they end up, you got them prepped up, teed up, ready to get into the research in CJ450. In CJ450, currently, or as at the time of this video, there's a loophole that some students have identified whereby it doesn't explain to them, or it isn't explicit, that CJ430 and CJ450 are in tandem. And so there are some students who were doing secondary research. Here is the goal. The goal is in CJ430, the goal is across both of these. For the research, the student to A, in CJ430, learn how to do the research, learn what the requirements are to do research, and be prepared to collect the research data so that they can do data analysis. Collecting surveys, constructing surveys, distributing surveys, collecting the information, and analyzing the data is a big component of this research project. In CJ450, after they've done all of that, which is where they'll pretty much do that activity. Then they have a chance to analyze the data, develop identify what their findings are, construct their findings, and report out their conclusions. CJ430, chapters 1, 2, and 3. CJ450, chapters 4 and 5. CJ430, introduction, literature review, methodology. CJ450, findings and conclusions along with their final report. That's how this is designed to go about. So I don't know if, I wasn't sure if everybody was aware of what the whole process was or what the intent was for the CJ430, 450 course, but that is the process, that is the intent. And so I'm hoping that I'll get your support in getting that action off. Lastly, the students have expressed, at least this semester and other semesters, that they're not getting a lot of feedback when they're sending out surveys to other CJ students for a variety of reasons. This is what I want you to express to your students in whatever class, not just these two capstone classes, but whatever class you're teaching. At some point, if they're following this path in CJ with Park University and they're going to get a degree, they will be receiving a survey, because at some point they're going to be in the same position to be getting surveys. So it is incumbent upon them to just do the survey. They're usually very short. They're very easy to do. They can respond to them hopefully honestly, and then allow the student who's at this level to have some data that they can actually analyze and action on. It doesn't take very long, and I promise not to inundate them with these surveys. So no matter where they are in their journey through their academic journey, they are very likely to get a survey or two from various students. Again, I want you to encourage your students to complete those surveys and send them back. We'll try and, on our end, make that as easy as possible. But again, that's part of the process. So that's my plug for ensuring that surveys do get distributed, surveys do get completed. All right. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, I ask that you would provide those to me. You have my email at ematthews@park.edu, or you can give me a call at area code 816-584-6509. I hope to attach to this video the 3 forms that I showed you here, so that moving forward, no matter where you are in this process, that you'll be able to provide your students with the correct, up-to-date information. Thanks a lot for your time, your attention, and more importantly, for your support for our program and for your students. Have a great day, and I'll see you online.